In 1994, an island called Isabella in the Galapagos archipelago caught fire. The same thing had happened 9 years earlier, in 1985, and that event was recognized all over the world as a major ecological disaster. Parts of volcanic islands quite frequently catch fire during eruptions without making the news. But there was something about this island that aroused a special interest, leading to the arrival by air of an international fire brigade. Newspaper headlines spelt out the reason for the worldwide anxiety. The Galapagos are home to some of the rarest animals and plants on Earth. Since 1959, they've been a national park. The islands are very remote, 950 kilometers out in the Pacific from the coast of Ecuador, the country of which they're part. This isolation is the main reason for their importance. The Galapagos had been intensively studied, but in 1985 the general public knew little of them. Some early reports talked inaccurately about giant sea turtles being at risk. In fact, the danger was to a race of giant tortoises that lived on the slopes of Sierra Negra, one of Isabella's 5 great volcanoes. As soon as they discovered the extent of the fire, the Galapagos National Park Service built a compound walled with lava rocks. They planned to move into it a breeding nucleus of at least 20 Sierra Negra tortoises. Isabella is one of the few inhabited islands in the Galapagos with a small population of settlers. Like the later fire of 1994, this one had been started by farmers burning diseased coffee bushes. It had spread to the thick, dry vegetation produced that year by unusually heavy rains, followed by drought. The Sierra Negra tortoises, like those on the other 4 volcanoes on Isabella, are a distinct subspecies. Tortoises cannot cross the fields of jagged lava that separate the volcanoes, so that the 5 subspecies never interbreed. If the fire had destroyed the Sierra Negra tortoises, a whole subspecies would have vanished forever. Each rescued tortoise was marked so that eventually it could be returned to the area where it was caught, and its movements followed. The head of Galapagos National Park, Miguel Cifuentes, checked in each capture, large and small. The Park Service organized local settlers to help dig a fire break 50 kilometers long. Ecuador sent a naval helicopter to carry supplies to the firefighters on the inaccessible and waterless slopes of Sierra Negra. The Ecuadorian army mobilized 300 troops to help build the firebreak. The fire began on February the 26th, 1984. By mid-March, it was raging as fiercely as ever. There is very little water in the Galapagos, and certainly not enough for fighting a fire on this scale. Finally, the Canadian government sent 2 Catalina amphibians to bomb the fires with seawater. 9 years later, these aircraft were in mothballs, but in 1985 they were in regular service. Each can pick up 8 tons of water at a time, taking it on board through a narrow scoop in the hull. The water bomber's usual task was extinguishing Canadian forest fires. The problem now was that the fire was spreading deep in cracks in the lava, feeding on old humus and roots as much as 2 meters below the surface. Only the water bombers had any hope of putting out these underground fires. The fire was finally extinguished 5 months after it started. The giant tortoises of Sierra Negra were safe, not one was lost, but 400 square kilometers of wilderness had been devastated. The fire was started accidentally by human activity. Humans have done little to benefit this Eden since they first arrived. The first man to set foot on the islands was Fray Thomas de Berlanga, Bishop of Panama. In 1535, the bishop was caught in a calm on a voyage from Panama to Peru. Ocean currents carried him 800 kilometers off course to a group of hitherto unknown islands. The bishop looked ashore to a weird landscape inhabited by even weirder creatures. On his return, he wrote a report to his emperor, Charles V of Spain, describing the great black lizards that thronged the lava shores and commenting on the remarkable tameness of all the creatures he met. He didn't give the islands a name. That was left to the Spanish navigators who followed him. First they called them Las Encantadas, the Enchanted Isles, and later Los Galapagos, the Tortoise Islands. In his dispatch, the bishop commented that the terrain ashore was rather uninviting, one of the great understatements of the past 4.5 centuries. In the late 17th century, the buccaneers who raided the Spanish ports of Central and South America used the Galapagos as a base. The islands held great attractions for them. They were far enough away from the mainland to be safe from Spanish reprisals, and they offered abundant food and firewood. There was even a little fresh water in the rainy season. The giant tortoises provided a supply of fresh meat. They could be kept alive in a ship's hold for up to a year. They took hundreds away with them, though it was the whalers and sealers a century later who did most of the damage to the tortoises. It's often said that the pirates released goats on the islands to provide meat for future visits. Some of their goats may have escaped, but it's unlikely that they released them deliberately. Tortoises and turtles provided all the meat they needed. The goats were brought in later by settlers. One curse that the buccaneers did unleash on the islands, albeit unwittingly, was the black rat. It came ashore in their stores and escaped in numbers when they hauled their ships out for repairs. The descendants of those rats damage the wildlife to this day. One of the buccaneers' favorite bolt holes was the cove called Las Cuevas on the island of Floriana. On the rocks by the shore are carved the names of some early vessels that called there. Las Cuevas provides a fairly protected anchorage, a rare facility in the Galapagos. The buccaneers made shelters for themselves and their stores by hollowing out caves in the soft rock. From 1780 to 1860, British and American whalers and sealers invaded the Galapagos. Between them, they did irreparable damage to the island's wildlife. greatest harm came from their practice of removing animals. They soon rediscovered the giant tortoise as an apparently limitless source of fresh meat. At that time, tortoises were abundant on the islands and easy to collect, as well as conveniently shaped for loading and stacking. The tortoise answered all the requirements of a hungry and protein-deficient whaler's crew. It's estimated that in about 80 years, these ships took over 100,000 giant tortoises away as fresh meat. They killed them not only for food, but for their fat. Large numbers were rendered down to produce barrels of cooking oil for their voyages. Between them, whalers and sealers brought some of the subspecies of Galapagos tortoises close to extinction. The whalers had less effect on the abundant stocks of the animals they came here to hunt. They had heard of the rich waters around the islands of Fernandina and Isabella, where sperm whales especially were plentiful. The sealers not only took their share of the tortoises, they also killed tens of thousands of the unique Galapagos fur seals for their skins. One sealer, Captain Benjamin Morel, recorded that he killed 5,000 in 2 months. By the 1930s, the fur seal was nearly wiped out. Today, under complete protection, its population has recovered. The sad story of the harm humans have done continues with the arrival of the first settlers about 100 years ago. They released domestic animals such as donkeys and, far worse, goats. Donkeys destroy some vegetation, but goats eat everything. Today, the national park staff hunt them systematically, but goats are very hard to eradicate on such rough terrain. Feral cats are even more difficult to control. After a couple of generations, escaped cats become completely wild. Iguanas especially are easy prey for them. So are the young of birds like penguins, and the Galapagos cormorant, which is also flightless. Escaped dogs, too, have bred in the wild and become ruthless predators. But cats, because of their innate hunting skills, are the most destructive of a long list of harmful animals introduced by settlers over the last century. The descendants of the black rats brought in by the buccaneers are an almost equal menace. The cats ignore them in favor of easier prey. People live on only 4 of the 13 main islands, and there is an airport on another. In the moist central uplands of Santa Cruz, there are 2 farms, but also a reserve for the local race of giant tortoises. Here, the interests of domestic and wild animals don't clash, but in the islands as a whole, with a human population of about 15,000 growing by as much as 12% each year, the conflict between people and the native animals is bound to increase. One reason for the harm done by introduced animals to the Galapagos fauna is evident from these scenes of the camera team on location. Galapagos creatures are completely tame. They had never encountered predatory mammals until ships brought them here and let them loose. The wildlife was, and still is, a sitting target for feral cats, dogs, pigs, and rats. The Galapagos hawk, one of the island's few predators, shows no fear of man. Charles Darwin himself commented, "A gun here is almost superfluous. for with the muzzle of one I pushed a hawk off a tree. Seabird colonies everywhere are vulnerable to rats, cats and dogs. In the Galapagos, the seabirds are remarkably approachable. The roughness of the terrain makes it extremely hard to control the animals that prey on them. Even the seas around the islands are under pressure from humanity. They're well supplied with fish, but each year the frigate birds have to compete with more local fishing boats. As the human population grows, the competition increases. Some of the seabirds have become full-time scavengers, relying for food on what the fishermen throw away. The government tries to control fishing, but among the scattered islands it's a difficult task. Not every human activity has been harmful. Ecuador was quick to realize the international importance of the islands. In 1959, they were declared a national park, and 9 years later, the Ecuadorian Park Services came into operation. In 1964, the park had won an important ally. The Charles Darwin Foundation opened a research station here at Academy Bay on Santa Cruz to carry out scientific research and to assist in training guides and wardens. One of the first programs to be set up by the National Park and Darwin Station was the captive breeding of endangered animals in order to return them to islands where their populations had become dangerously low. One of them was the Espanola, or Hood Island tortoise. In 1964, it seemed doomed to extinction. The few survivors were competing with goats for the island's meager vegetation. The tortoises were so scattered that they probably hadn't bred for 50 years. This was the beginning of the Tortoise Action Plan. The scientists removed the only 4 that they could find, a male and 3 females, and moved them to Santa Cruz. Almost at once, they began to mate. Eventually, the collection contained 2 males and 11 females. The San Diego Zoo contributed another male to add genetic variation. The San Diego tortoise soon became the station's principal stud animal. The first eggs were put into incubators made from converted bird cages. Zoos overseas had found it difficult to breed giant tortoises, but for all its makeshift methods, the Darwin station met with more success on the tortoise's home ground. Today, the technique is more sophisticated, with the temperature carefully controlled, but these first efforts were largely guesswork. Nevertheless, the first batches of eggs hatched out well. Meanwhile, the goats on Espanola had to be eliminated. There would have been no sense in releasing young tortoises if the goats were going to eat all the food. Espanola is flat, with very little jagged lava, and it's only about 6 kilometers long. Getting rid of the goats there was comparatively easy. In 1975, the first young tortoises were returned to Espanola. In the next 10 years, more than 150 joined them. Then came a nasty shock. Experts had discovered that the sex of tortoises is determined not by genetics, but by the temperature at which they're incubated. One temperature produces all males, and another all females. The news seemed to imply that years of devoted work by the park and station staff had succeeded only in restocking Espanola with a one-sex population. It's impossible to tell the sex of a very small tortoise, so the research staff remained for some time in an agony of uncertainty. Since then, tortoise production has become a much more exact science, with the eggs incubated so as to produce both sexes. By 1989, 184 tortoises had been released on Hispaniola, and 200 more were living on Santa Cruz. The park staff keep a careful watch on the growth and well-being of the captive offspring. Captive breeding programs are now underway for 5 other islands, as well as Hispaniola. The numbers on the shell denote the hatching date and also the island of origin. So far, about 3,500 tortoises have been repatriated. There's a reassuring footnote about the first releases on Hispaniola. The scientist in charge of the rearing program later found newly hatched tortoises on the island, evidence that those early repatriates included both males and females. The captive breeding program has been a success, but Hispaniola is very small and can't support a large population. A subspecies that lives only on one small island will always be at risk. However, the reserves on Santa Cruz should mean that the future of the Hispaniola tortoise is secure. Something has been done to redress the balance, but there's much more still to do. The land iguanas of the Galapagos are in far greater trouble than the tortoises. They survive now only on 7 of the 13 main islands, but their future seems assured on just 4 of them, all uninhabited. Fernandina is one. Each year the females congregate to excavate their nests around the crater rim of its great volcano. The colonies on Santa Cruz and Isabella, 2 of the inhabited islands, are more vulnerable. They need help from the scientists at Darwin Station. As with the tortoises, each island has its own subspecies. This is a Santa Cruz land iguana. At the station, the iguanas nest naturally, but as soon as they've laid, their eggs are removed to the safety of an incubator. The large enclosures aren't roofed in, and there's always the danger of rats or feral cats robbing the nests. On both Santa Cruz and Isabella, the land iguanas had been almost wiped out by the cats and dogs. Once again, before there could be any hope of re-establishing their colonies, the predators had to be brought under control. Operations began while the first batches of iguana eggs were hatching in the station's incubators. There are anything from 7 to 23 eggs in a clutch, and they hatch in about 3.5 months. The first releases began in 1982 on both islands. By then the wild dogs had largely been dealt with, though the cats proved harder to eradicate. They killed the very small iguanas and even half-grown animals. The station is attacking the problem by experimenting to find out which age and size has the best chance of escaping the predators. Early indications are that the program is succeeding. Several hundred iguanas have been marked and released on Isabella since 1982, and about 1/3 of them have since been sighted by wardens. With luck, many more of them have survived. Small iguanas are extremely hard to find, even when they're marked with colored beads. the most endangered Galapagos bird, nests in the moist volcanic uplands. This is its breeding area, 300 meters up on the island of Floriana. It's the dark-rumped or Hawaiian petrel. It's been nearly wiped out in Hawaii, and now it's going the same way in the Galapagos, and for the same reason: predation by feral mammals, principally rats. Felipe Cruz, son of one of the few farmers on Floriana, devoted much of his time to the protection of the dark-rumped petrel. He's a keen naturalist who began by eliminating Floriana's wild dogs to protect its livestock and wildlife. Later, his interest spread to the conservation of the petrels. The Darwin Station welcomed Felipe's help. Now, with the support of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, Floriana shelters one of the largest petrel colonies in the Galapagos. The dark-rumped petrel is a nocturnal seabird which nests in crevices in the lava and in earth burrows. Early settlers found them in immense numbers. There are still a total of 10,000 pairs on 4 islands in the Galapagos, but their numbers are falling fast, at about 30% per year in some places, because of predation and the trampling of their nest sites by donkeys, cattle and horses. Assisted by his American wife, Justine, Felipe Cruz recorded progress in 100 nests, visiting each one once a week from February until September, when the last of the chicks had flown. Dark-rumped petrels lay only 1 egg. In the first year of his study, he visited 43 nests. From these, only 13 chicks were fledged. The next year, there was some improvement. 48 chicks from 104 nests. The third year saw a great change for the better. 100 nests produced 72 fledged chicks. The increase came about because Felipe and Justine had begun a determined campaign to trap rats. Even for the Cruzes who live on Floriana and are used to the conditions, it was arduous work. The trails to the colony are steep and tortuous. Because of the danger to other wildlife, they couldn't use poison baits and anticoagulants. Instead, they set hundreds of traps each day. By the third year, predation by rats had ceased, and the main nesting colony had been declared a protected area by the local settlers. The first settlers who tried to farm the uplands of Floriana complained that they were kept awake by the petrel's weird cries. Thanks largely to the work of Felipe and Justine Cruz, the nights are still as noisy, at least around this one colony of 1,000 birds. On the other 3 islands where the petrels breed, their situation is by no means as good. The enemies of Galapagos wildlife come in many shapes and sizes. Invariably, they've been introduced. Fire ants are a virulent example of the smaller kind. No one knows quite how they reached the Galapagos, but it was probably in imported timber or vegetation. They appeared first in 1910 and soon spread among the inhabited islands. On Floriana, they invaded a petrel colony and drove nesting birds away from their traditional burrows. Their bites are painful to larger animals, including humans. They attack anything, great or small. Here they've just killed a large spider. Whenever the invaders appear, the national park wardens attack them. They found that the best way to fight fire ants is with fire. With the memory of the Great Fire on Isabella still fresh in their minds, they begin by building a fire break around a new colony on Santa Fe. The colonies spread quickly, advancing at a rate of about 150 meters per year. It's important to take countermeasures as soon as a new infestation is spotted. The islands offer many opportunities for research into creatures which visit the Galapagos to breed. An inlet on Santa Cruz called Caleta Tortuga Negra is one such breeding ground. The name means Black Turtle Cove. Turtles are not the only species to frequent the shallows among the mangroves. These are golden rays. Green turtles come to the lagoon to mate. The females then find a sandy beach on which to lay their eggs. There are often 200 or 300 turtles in the lagoon. There are sharks too, though they never attack people. It's a unique opportunity for the Darwin Station scientists to catch turtles as part of a study that's been going on for 20 years. Despite the protection given them by the national park, the green turtles that visit the Galapagos still have problems. The barnacles they carry do them no harm, but on some beaches, feral pigs dig up every single nest. One purpose of the operation is to check the sizes and probable ages of the turtles. The station staff also tag them so that their progress can be followed and their breeding success monitored. Catching, measuring, and marking breeding turtles is the easiest part of the work. The real problem is to get rid of the marauding pigs. They're nocturnal, so they forage while the female turtles are ashore laying their eggs. They've been seen to eat eggs as fast as the turtle lays them. Once again, the conservation problem is the eradication of escaped domestic animals. Another part of the study takes place on the nesting beaches between sunset and sunrise when the female turtles come ashore. tagging has revealed some disturbing facts. It was previously thought that during a single breeding season, most female turtles made 2 or 3 nests and laid batches of 70 to 80 eggs in each. The Galapagos study has found evidence that as many as 45% of the females only nest once in a lifetime. Many turtles throughout the tropics must have been slaughtered before they even had a chance to breed. More than half of them nest every season. Why there should be such a difference in the nesting capacity of different females is still a mystery. As dawn breaks, the last of the females heads back to the sea bearing a Darwin Station tag. Returns have shown that nearly 90% of those females that return to lay in the following seasons choose exactly the same beach, almost certainly the one on which they themselves originally hatched. The plight of the green turtle is the same the world over, but Galapagos is the laboratory where many of its problems may yet be solved. No story of human intervention in the Galapagos would be complete without a tribute to the young scientists who come from all over the world to work on these barren, isolated islands. David Anderson and Sharon Fortner are typical. They studied the behavior and ecology of masked boobies on Hispaniola. Despite the hardships of scientific work in the Galapagos, the Darwin Station is bombarded with applications from research students and can therefore take its pick. Endurance is one of the essential qualities. The equatorial sun, intensified by reflection from the water, burns as it does in few places on Earth. There's no fresh water. Students must be prepared to stay on their island for months at a time. Usually their research grants aren't large enough to provide them with radios. In real distress, they must rely on signaling passing tourist boats. David Anderson, a PhD student from the University of Pennsylvania, worked each day with Sharon Fortner, a former biology student from Michigan, to catch, measure and weigh adult masked boobies as well as their chicks. The increasing weight of the chicks shows how much food they're getting, which is a result of how plentiful small fish are and how efficient the parents are at catching them. David Anderson's research provided information about the boobies' lifespan, their age at first breeding, and whether the birds mate with the same partners each year.
Common is 98.3. The wing is 471.
The wings are checked for damaged or missing feathers that might affect the bird's flying and fishing performance. Finally, the bird is ringed so that it won't have to be caught again. When anyone wants to identify it in future, they'll read the numbers on the ring with binoculars. After ringing, it's weighed. All the information is important for what it might reveal about the life of boobies. Their breeding behavior contains a classic conundrum. They hatch 2 chicks 5 days apart, but only one of them survives. Why this should be so is still not known, but Anderson's work was a step towards the answer. On many of the islands, including some very small ones, there are students studying the unique ecology of the Galapagos. The work is all the more urgent as the human population grows and its pressure on the environment increases. Recently, visitors from abroad have added to that pressure. Dolphins enthusiastically greet the tourist boats. The visitors come 100 at a time on Ecuadorian cruise ships or in small parties on chartered yachts. On any one day, 88 vessels are allowed among the islands, and between them they bring about 50,000 people to visit the Galapagos each year. The authorities do all they can to contain the threat of damage. The number of tourists at each site is strictly controlled. The ships must carry guides trained by the government. Some are local people with a little science training. Higher-grade guides must have a science degree and be fluent in 2 foreign languages. Having passed their examination, they must work for at least 6 months every year to retain their annual license. None may supervise more than 16 people. The tourists are limited to trails marked by black and white posts. They're allowed ashore only on selected islands, and once there, they're strictly controlled by the guides. The wildlife doesn't appear to be affected by the invasion. The flightless cormorants carry on their courtship display, ignoring the audience. A third of the tourists are from Ecuador, but those from other parts of the world bring much needed foreign currency. The official limit was 25,000 visitors per year, but it proved impossible to enforce and was abandoned. Immigrants from Ecuador provide services and sell souvenirs, increasing the resident population and the problems. The management plan, approved in 1991, hopes to stem the tide. The present number of people and ships must be near the limit the islands can bear. Any more visitors will increase the risk of damage on shore, and more residents will put yet more pressure on the marine environment, already badly overfished. There were plans to build large tourist hotels, but permission was always refused, and now there are firm regulations to limit all construction. The problem is familiar: to strike a balance between the needs of conservation and people's legitimate wish to see what is being conserved. For years, another problem was money. In spite of the revenue from tourism and international support, neither Darwin Station nor the National Park had sufficient funds to tackle the island's many problems. A solution came closer when a new wildlife institute was set up as part of the Ministry of Agriculture, with far-reaching powers over settlement and tourism in all the country's parks. The station still has only half the money it needs, but in 1994, the National Park received $1 million from the government. For the first time, it had a budget sufficient for the task in hand. Since 1978, the Galapagos have been a World Heritage Site, which means that Ecuador can call for international assistance and technical cooperation. It further means that the islands are more than ever in the spotlight of public concern. Both these factors should help to conserve their irreplaceable habitat and unique wildlife into the foreseeable future for the whole of humanity.